She wasn't looking for love anymore. She was only looking for peace. But the day he sat beside her and said nothing, she felt more understood than she had in years. For a long time, she believed her life had moved past the chapter of love, not because she had stopped believing in it, but because she had grown tired of what love had cost her. Years of giving, years of compromising, years of holding relationships together with quiet endurance. She had loved deeply once, the kind of love where you build a life, share responsibilities, and believe you are moving in the same direction. But somewhere along the way, that love had turned into routine, and routine had slowly turned into distance. Conversations became practical, affection became rare, understanding became optional, and one day, without a dramatic ending or harsh words, the relationship simply became something she survived, rather than something she lived. After that, she stopped expecting love to feel safe. She stopped believing that emotional closeness was something meant for her. Instead, she built a life that was stable, predictable, and quiet. Her mornings began with coffee and a few moments of stillness before the day unfolded. She had learned to enjoy these small rituals, the warmth of the cup in her hands, the soft light through the window, the quiet hum of a world not yet fully awake. She worked, she kept her home in order, she checked in with family, she remembered birthdays and appointments. She remained dependable, the person everyone trusted, the one who always showed up. But when the day ended and the house grew silent, she felt a familiar emptiness settle in the room. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was the absence of being truly known. There is a difference between being surrounded by people and being emotionally seen. She had learned that difference slowly, through years of feeling present in conversations yet unseen within them. Friends would sometimes suggest she try dating again. They spoke with encouragement, promising that companionship could return joy to her life. She would smile politely and change the subject. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was simply tired. Tired of starting over, tired of explaining herself, tired of hoping for understanding that never fully arrived. Peace had become more valuable than possibility, so she stopped searching. She filled her weekends with small comforts instead: a walk through the park, browsing a bookstore, tending to her plants, long phone calls with her sister, and quiet evenings with a novel resting open in her lap. It was not the life she had imagined in her younger years, but it was calm, and calm felt safe. One Thursday afternoon, she stopped at a small neighborhood cafe she had recently discovered. It wasn't remarkable in appearance: a few wooden tables, soft music in the background, the comforting scent of coffee and baked bread in the air. Yet there was something about the place that invited stillness. She ordered her usual tea and chose a table near the window. Outside, the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the sidewalk. People passed by in quiet rhythm, strangers moving through their own private stories. She opened her book, but found herself staring at the page without reading. For the first time in days, her schedule had no urgency attached to it. No deadlines, no responsibilities pressing at the edges of her thoughts. Just space. As she sat there, she became aware of the chair across her being gently pulled back. A man, perhaps in his late 60s, asked softly, "Is this seat taken?" She looked up, momentarily surprised. "No," she replied, offering a polite nod. He sat down with a simple thank you, placing a cup of coffee on the table. There was nothing remarkable about the moment. No dramatic pause, no sudden spark, no feeling that the universe had arranged something significant. He didn't attempt conversation, he didn't interrupt her quiet. He simply sat there, reading a newspaper, occasionally lifting his cup, existing peacefully within the same shared space. And strangely, she did not feel the need to fill the silence. There was no pressure to be engaging, no expectation to be charming, no subtle performance required. For the first time in years, silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt shared. Minutes passed. The soft music played in the background, cups clinked gently against saucers. Outside, the world moved at its usual pace. Inside, something unfamiliar settled within her chest. Not excitement, not nervousness, not anticipation, just ease. She returned to her book, turning a page slowly. She found herself reading without distraction now, aware of another presence nearby, yet not burdened by it. At one point, he glanced up and offered a small, respectful smile. Not intrusive, not expectant, just kind. She returned the smile without thinking. It was a small exchange, easily forgotten by anyone else. But something about it lingered. There was no urgency in the moment, no pressure, no need to define anything. Just a quiet understanding that sharing space with someone did not have to feel heavy. When she finished her tea and gathered her things, he looked up again. "Have a good evening," he said gently. "You too," she replied. She stepped outside into the cool air, unsure why the moment stayed with her as she walked toward her car. Nothing extraordinary had happened. No deep conversation, no emotional confession, no promise of seeing each other again. And yet, for the first time in a very long while, being near someone had not made her feel guarded. It had not required effort. It had not disturbed her peace. It had simply existed alongside it. As she drove home beneath the soft glow of evening light, she realized something she had not expected. For years, she had believed peace meant being alone. But perhaps peace could also exist beside someone, quietly, gently, without demand. And for the first time in years, that possibility did not feel frightening. It felt comforting.
The following week, she found herself returning to the same cafe. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe the tea was good. Maybe the quiet comfort of the place had stayed with her. Or maybe she wanted to feel that ease again, the kind that had surprised her the week before. She chose the same table by the window. After ordering her tea, she placed her bag on the chair beside her and watched people pass outside. There was no expectation in her chest. She reminded herself this was simply a peaceful place to sit, nothing more. A few minutes later, she heard the soft sound of the door opening. He walked in. She recognized him instantly, not because he stood out, but because his presence carried the same quiet steadiness she remembered. He glanced around the room, then toward her table. "Is this seat taken today?" he asked with a gentle smile. She found herself smiling back. "No," she said. He sat down just as he had the week before, without hurry, without formality, without disturbing the calm space between them. For several minutes they remained in comfortable silence. She turned the pages of her book. He sipped his coffee while reading the newspaper. Then, without effort, conversation began. "Do you come here often?" he asked. His voice was soft, the kind that did not demand attention. "Recently," she replied. "I like the quiet here." He nodded, as if he understood completely. "It's not easy to find quiet places in a noisy world." She smiled. The conversation was simple, so simple it might have been forgettable to anyone else, but to her, it felt different because there was no performance in it. They spoke about the weather, about how the seasons seemed to shift more quickly with each passing year, about the old trees lining the street that turned golden every autumn. She mentioned volunteering at the local library. He shared that he had recently retired and was learning how to live his days at a slower pace. There were no intrusive questions, no probing into the past, no rush toward familiarity, just a conversation unfolding gently. When he laughed, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, not in a way that suggested hardship, but in a way that revealed a life that had softened him rather than hardened him. She found that strangely comforting. For years, she had been used to conversations where people waited for their turn to speak rather than truly listening. But here, he listened, not to interrupt, not to advise, simply to hear. And she realized how rare it was to feel heard. Time moved without announcement. When she gathered her things to leave, he said, "Maybe I'll see you next week." He didn't say it like a proposal. He said it like a possibility. Outside, her steps felt lighter than usual. This wasn't love. It wasn't even attraction. It was something quieter, something steady, something trustworthy. As she drove home, she noticed she was smiling for no particular reason. She didn't question what this was. She didn't try to define it, because for the first time in years, there was no need to understand something immediately. Over the next few weeks, it became a small ritual. Every Thursday, the same cafe, the same table, the same silence that was no longer unfamiliar. Sometimes they talked about books, sometimes about songs they remembered from childhood, sometimes about small details that made life lighter. Morning sunlight, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of rain beginning. And sometimes they simply sat in quiet companionship. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of understanding, ease, and a rare comfort that did not require words. She noticed she no longer felt guarded. She did not measure her words. She did not try to impress. She simply existed as herself. One evening, she admitted something quietly. She found herself looking forward to Thursdays. The realization did not frighten her. It calmed her, because this time there was no rush, no expectation, no promise, only presence. And perhaps, sometimes love begins exactly there. By the time spring began to soften the air, their Thursday meetings had become part of the quiet rhythm of her life. There had been no formal agreement, no exchange of numbers, no defined plan to meet again. Yet each week, sometime between late afternoon and early evening, they arrived, as if guided by the same unspoken understanding. At first, she told herself it was coincidence, then routine, and eventually she stopped questioning it. Some connections do not announce themselves. they unfold gently, like light slowly filling a room. One Thursday, rain tapped softly against the cafe windows. The street outside shimmered beneath reflections of passing headlights, and the sky hung low with heavy clouds. She arrived early, shaking droplets from her umbrella before folding it neatly by the door. The warmth inside the cafe wrapped around her as she settled into her usual seat. He arrived a few minutes later, brushing rain from his coat, his hair slightly damp from the weather. "You made it through the storm," he said lightly. She smiled. It didn't seem worth missing the quiet. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. They sat with their drinks warming their hands while the rain traced slow paths down the glass beside them. There is a particular comfort in sharing shelter from a storm. Even without conversation, the shared stillness creates a subtle bond, a sense of being paused in the same moment of time. He spoke first. "I used to hate rainy days," he said. "They felt heavy, lonely." She turned slightly toward him, listening. "And now?" she asked. "Now they feel peaceful," he replied after a pause, like permission to slow down. She considered this. "I think we only learn to slow down after life forces us to," she said. He gave a quiet, knowing smile. There was history in that smile. Not the kind that demanded explanation, but the kind that suggested both of them understood loss, change, and the quiet reshaping of expectations. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened, not through dramatic confessions, but through small revelations. He told her he had spent decades working long hours, believing he was providing stability for his family, only to realize later how much time he had sacrificed along the way. She shared how she had spent years caring for everyone around her, measuring her worth by how dependable she could be. Neither spoke with regret, only recognition. And in that recognition, there was understanding. They did not try to fix each other's pasts. They did not offer advice or solutions. They simply listened. Sometimes he would pause before speaking, choosing his words with care, as if he understood that silence could hold meaning too. Sometimes she found herself sharing thoughts she had never spoken aloud, not because they were secrets, but because she had never felt the space to say them. One afternoon, they sat watching sunlight spill across the wooden floor. "It's strange," she said softly, "how different life feels when no one is asking you to be anything other than yourself." He looked at her, not with surprise, but with recognition. "Yes," he said, "it feels lighter." That word lingered between them. Lighter. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just gently relieving. As spring unfolded, the trees outside the cafe filled with new leaves, soft green against the brightening sky. The air warmed, and people lingered longer on sidewalks, reluctant to return indoors. One Thursday, she arrived to find him already seated, 2 cups on the table. "I took a chance," he said, sliding one toward her. "I remembered what you usually order." She looked at the cup, then at him. It was a small gesture. Simple. Thoughtful. Uncomplicated. "Thank you," she said softly. There was no grand significance attached to the moment, no sudden shift, no dramatic realization, and yet something in her chest softened. For years, she had been the one remembering details, anticipating needs, making life easier for others. To be remembered, in such a quiet way, felt unfamiliar and deeply touching. They spoke that afternoon about ordinary things, a book he had finished, a neighbor's garden beginning to bloom, the comfort of familiar routines. But beneath the conversation flowed something unspoken, a growing ease, a trust forming without effort. When she left that day, she noticed she no longer felt the heaviness that once accompanied solitude. Instead, she carried a quiet warmth with her, something steady, something calm. That evening, as she placed her keys on the kitchen counter and set down her bag, the silence of her home felt different. It no longer echoed. It rested. She moved through her evening slowly, aware of a gentle shift inside her. Not excitement, not anticipation, but a quiet reassurance. For years, she had believed love arrived loudly, with urgency, intensity, and sweeping emotion. But what if love, in its truest form, arrived quietly? What if it did not disrupt peace, but sat beside it? What if it did not demand transformation, but allowed authenticity? She did not rush to answer these questions. She had learned the beauty of letting moments unfold without forcing meaning upon them. Yet as she turned off the light that night and settled into bed, one thought surfaced with unexpected clarity. For the first time in years, connection did not feel like effort. It felt like rest. And perhaps, she thought as sleep gently found her, the safest kind of love is the one that never asks you to stop being yourself.
Summer arrived gradually, warming the sidewalks and filling the air with the soft hum of life lived outdoors. The cafe windows stayed open longer now, letting in the scent of blooming flowers and distant laughter from people lingering in the evening light. Their Thursday meetings continued, unchanged in schedule, yet subtly transformed in meaning. What had once been a shared table had become a shared space. What had begun as polite conversation had become a familiar presence. And what neither of them rushed to define had begun to feel quietly significant. One afternoon, she arrived to find him sitting outside at one of the small sidewalk tables, sunlight resting gently across his shoulders. He looked up as she approached, his expression brightening in a way that felt natural rather than performative. "I thought we could enjoy the weather today," he said. She nodded, taking the seat across from him. The warmth of the sun felt comforting against her skin, and for a moment they sat without speaking, simply watching the slow rhythm of the street. A woman walked her dog past them. A couple laughed over shared headphones. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes answered a passing breeze. "It feels different outside," she said. He nodded, less separate from the world. She understood exactly what he meant. For years, she had lived inside routines and responsibilities, moving through life with purpose, but rarely with presence. Now, sitting beneath an open sky with no urgent to be, she felt connected to the moment in a way she had forgotten was possible. They spoke about small summer rituals, evening walks, open windows at night, the comfort of lighter days. Then, after a pause, he said, "I used to think peace came from everything in life going right." She tilted her head slightly. "And now?" "Now I think peace comes from learning what to hold and what to release." His words settled gently between them. She thought of the years she had held everything together, expectations, responsibilities, emotional weight, believing strength meant never letting anything fall. "What have you released?" she asked. He considered the question, not hurried to answer. "The need to prove myself," he said at last. "The idea that my worth depends on how much I produce, provide, or endure." She felt a quiet recognition stir within her. "I'm still learning that," she admitted. He met her eyes with quiet understanding. "It takes time." There was no judgment in his voice, only patience. And in that patience, she felt safe enough to breathe more deeply. Over the following weeks, their connection grew not through grand declarations, but through quiet consistency. He remembered which table she preferred. She noticed he liked his coffee without sugar. He began arriving a few minutes early. She found herself lingering a few minutes longer. One Thursday, she arrived feeling heavier than usual. The day had been filled with small frustrations, lingering responsibilities, and the familiar weight of being needed in too many places at once. He noticed immediately. "You seem tired," he said gently. The words were simple, but they carried no demand, only concern. She exhaled slowly. "It's been one of those days." He didn't ask for details. He didn't offer solutions. He simply slid her cup of tea closer and said, "Then today can just be quiet." Relief moved through her in a way she hadn't expected. They sat together without conversation, the silence not empty but supportive, like a soft place to rest after carrying too much. And she realized something in that moment. Comfort is not always found in words. Sometimes it is found in being allowed to rest without explanation. As the sun lowered and the evening softened, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. By the time she stood to leave, the heaviness she had carried in had loosened its grip. "Thank you," she said. He gave a small shake of his head. "You don't have to thank someone for sitting beside you." The words stayed with her long after she drove home. That night, she opened her windows to let the warm air drift through the house. The curtains moved gently with the breeze, and for the first time in years, the silence of her home did not feel like absence. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to rest. Space to simply exist.
She sat in her favorite chair, a book resting in her lap, but her thoughts drifted instead. There had been no promises between them, no declarations, no attempt to name what was growing. Yet what she felt was unmistakable. She felt safe. Not the fragile safety of temporary happiness, but the steady safety of being accepted without performance. She thought back to earlier years, when love had felt urgent, filled with expectations, misunderstandings, and the constant effort to maintain harmony. This felt different. This felt unforced, like something unfolding in its own time, like something that did not need to be rushed to be real. Weeks later, as twilight painted the sky in soft shades of amber and violet, they lingered outside the cafe long after their cups were empty. Neither seemed eager to leave. Finally, he said quietly, "I've come to look forward to Thursdays." She smiled. "So have I." No more words were needed. They stood, gathering their things slowly, aware of the comfort that now existed in their shared routine. As she walked to her car, she felt a gentle warmth settle within her. Not the intensity she once believed love required, but something steadier, something kinder, something that did not demand she become anyone other than who she already was. And as she drove home beneath the fading light, she understood a truth she had never considered before. Belonging does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly and sits beside you until you realize you are no longer alone.
Autumn arrived quietly, brushing the trees with shades of amber and gold. The air turned crisp, and the cafe began closing its doors earlier in the evenings, keeping the warmth inside as the days grew shorter. Their Thursdays remained unchanged. Same place, same table, same unspoken understanding. Yet something within her had shifted. Months earlier, she had come to this place searching only for quiet, a space untouched by expectations, a moment of stillness in a life long defined by responsibility. She had not come looking for connection. She had certainly not come looking for love. And yet, connection had found her, gently, patiently, without demand. One Thursday afternoon, she arrived to find the cafe unusually quiet. Soft music drifted through the room, and the golden light of late afternoon rested across the wooden floor. He was already there. He looked up and smiled, the same warm, unhurried smile she had come to recognize as familiar comfort. As she sat down, she realized there was no longer any sense of awkwardness between them, no careful measuring of words, no hesitation, just ease. They spoke about the changing season, about how autumn had a way of inviting reflection, about how cooler air seemed to slow the world just enough to notice what mattered. "I used to think endings were sad," she said thoughtfully. "Now they feel peaceful." He considered her words. "Maybe because endings make room," he replied, "for things we didn't expect." She felt the truth of that settle within her. For years she had believed the closing of one chapter meant loss, but now she understood. Sometimes an ending is simply space being created for something gentler to arrive. They lingered over their drinks longer than usual. Outside, leaves drifted across the sidewalk in quiet spirals. People walked with scarves wrapped close, shoulders lifted against the chill. Inside, warmth held steady. After a pause, he said, "I never planned to meet anyone like this." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. "I wasn't looking for anything," he continued. "I had grown comfortable with my own quiet." She smiled softly. "So had I." He nodded, and maybe that's why this feels easy. Easy. The word did not diminish what existed between them. It honored it. Because what they shared had not been built on urgency or loneliness or the need to fill an emptiness. It had grown in the presence of peace. Neither had needed rescuing. Neither had asked the other to become someone different. They had simply met, as two people who had lived, lost, learned, and softened with time. And in that softness, something steady had taken root. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fading light shift toward evening. Finally, she spoke. "I used to think love had to be intense to be real." He glanced at her. "And now?" he asked gently. "Now I think love feels like being able to breathe," she said, "like not having to guard your heart every moment." He held her gaze, not with surprise, but with quiet agreement. "Yes," he said, "like coming home."
The words settled between them with unexpected tenderness. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just true. When they stood to leave, the cool evening air greeted them at the door. For a moment they stood side by side on the sidewalk, watching leaves scatter along the curb. There was no rush to say goodbye, no urgency to define what came next. He turned toward her. "I'm glad I asked if that seat was taken." She felt a gentle warmth spread through her chest. "So am I," she replied. They parted with the same quiet ease that had defined every meeting, not with promises, not with declarations, but with the steady assurance that presence would continue. Driving home beneath the dim glow of streetlights, she reflected on the months that had passed. Nothing in her life had dramatically changed. Her home was the same, her routines were the same, her responsibilities remained. And yet, everything felt different. Because she no longer carried the silent weight of being unseen. She no longer believed peace required isolation. She no longer feared that connection would cost her herself. Instead, she had discovered something she had never known before. Love does not always arrive as a storm. Sometimes it arrives as shelter. Quiet, steady, safe. When she entered her home, the familiar silence greeted her, but it no longer echoed with emptiness. It rested softly around her. She set down her keys, removed her coat, and paused by the window. Outside, the autumn air moved gently through the trees. Inside, her heart felt calm. She realized she was not waiting for the next Thursday out of longing or loneliness. She was simply grateful that such quiet companionship existed in her life. Grateful that connection could grow without pressure. Grateful that love, when it finally arrived, did not disturb her peace, but became part of it. And as she turned off the lights and prepared for rest, one quiet truth settled within her. Some loves do not sweep you away. Some loves sit beside you, until you realize you are home.